Good morning, everybody. Kathleen, I'm not seeing myself or anyone else. All I'm seeing is the shared screen. So if that's how it's going to be, then that's okay. Just wanted to let you know. So, good morning, everybody else. This is the parent advocacy portion. And what we're trying to do today is give you an idea as to how to effectively and efficiently advocate. And the reason that we're doing this is because obviously all of you have difficulty. So first and foremost, let's jump to who we are. First, I am Ben Brockert. I am an
Hey,
attorney.
I'm stopping you, Ben. We can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Can everybody else hear me?
I can hear you. You just have a low voice, so you might just need to speak a little louder.
I got you. Okay, we can do this. All right, so starting out with the purpose, well, let's just go to the introductions. First, my name is Ben Brockert. I am an attorney. I represent primarily plaintiffs. That would be parents in special education due process hearings, as well as federal court cases, state and local cases, etc. So that is kind of my bag. It is exactly what I do. Joining me is my wife and partner in crime. Her name is Carrie Brockert, and I'll let her, if she can or would like to, introduce herself. Carrie?
Hey guys, we are excited to be here. I'm not really doing the presenting. I'm just here for if you need anything. Like I said, I couldn't hear him, so I'm not sure how he just introduced us, but our daughter is 14. She has autism. My background is 19 years in education. So long story short, I had my master's, was teaching gen ed kindergarten. Maddie came along. I went and got my second master's to do special education to help more parents like us, more kids like Maddie, and more teachers like I was. And then Ben went from the head football coach to going to law school. Anyway, so that's kind of our short and skinny background, and that's our purpose. So we're here to help on all angles, from to advocate for your kids, to advocate, as parents, and to know on the education part what's involved there. And then Ben can tell you the legality. I can't tell you that part.
Yeah, I can help you out with that. And I'm very apologetic. I don't understand why it's so difficult to hear me. I know it's low, but I'm trying to speak up, and if I have to, I can go and just change the microphone to the one on the Chromebook that I have rather than using these earbuds. Okay, want to go ahead and get started. Now, advocacy is not the same as legal representation. Okay, please make that distinction. Advocacy can be done by anybody. Self-advocacy is actually where you want to take your children. You want eventually to get them to the point where they can advocate, essentially be assertive in their efforts to obtain, demand, cajole their own needs, to get them met. So that is where we're trying to take all of this. What you're doing by following this checklist, as you see up on the screen, is you're creating a scenario where not only can you do it effectively, but you can also be a good example and a good representative to other people, to your children, et cetera, as to how to advocate for themselves. Advocacy only goes so far. Like I said, at the very bottom of the checklist, I get to the point where basically these are the things that you're going to be able to do that should be effective, and it should be capable of addressing most, if not all, of your issues with the school district. However, they are limited, and that inevitably you are going to get to a point where you hear the dreaded words that signal, gosh, I really need to seek out either an attorney or I need to contact the Department of Education. We'll jump to those at the end, but for right now, let's start with how do you get yourself prepared to be an appropriate advocate for your child? Well, first, as it says up there, you need to address your own misunderstandings, misconceptions, and biases. Now, the reason that you need to do that is because if you are like every parent of every child with special needs, you have been inordinately frustrated by your school district. Your school district has put up barriers. It's been very difficult to interact with them. It's been very difficult to get information from them. If that is not your experience, then frankly, you are one of the rare few fortunate ones who have educators in your life, like my wife, like Carrie. So that is incredibly rare. Now, what does it mean to address your own misunderstandings, misconceptions, and biases? All right, you have an understanding of the world, and that understanding of the world is shaped by your own experiences as a parent of a child with special needs. Make sure that you have a grasp as to how you view the school, how you view the teachers, how you view the administrators, and what perception or conceptions you have of them as you go into these meetings. It is very important to know what your triggers are, what will cause you to become anxious, angry, upset. You need to know what those things are, because that gives you the ability to identify them when they're thrown out there and to be able to address them appropriately and not derail any work that you have done or any progress that has been made. So you want to make sure that you address those things. Okay. Most of you are familiar with the idea of a misunderstanding or misconception. You thought something was one way, but it wasn't. Biases, on the other hand, are innate. That means they're a part of you. You didn't choose to think the way you do. It just is the way it is. Don't try to think that you have to change it, that it's good, that it's bad. Don't apply those type of value judgments to them. Just recognize them and know that they're there. Some of the biases are, and we'll go to the most rote or obvious, there are people out there who, think that positions of power or positions of authority should only belong in the hands of men. So if that is you, or if that is somebody you know, believe me, we're not saying that's wrong. We're not saying that that's incorrect, but we are saying that it is a part of your preconceptions, it's a part of your biases, so that when you go into a meeting and you're confronted with an administrator who isn't a man, you need to be ready to address that with yourself and to understand that that is going to change how you advocate. Being prepared and being aware of your own issues coming into a negotiation or a meeting is absolutely, it's necessary. You have to have it. So just kind of look inside yourself and try to identify the areas where you feel that you have already established understandings of people, situations, etc., and know what they are. That's it. You don't have to change them, just know what they are. Okay, number 2, focused. Gosh, guys, I tell you what, every meeting that I've ever been involved in, every client meeting, every IEP meeting, every hearing, even hearing officers, it is a tremendous effort to keep the discussion focused on your child. And if you are not focused on doing that, you'll be surprised how quickly you're going to slide down that rabbit hole and find yourself somewhere you had no idea you were going. So what you have to do is constantly remind yourself, your child is the focus. What she or he needs and can do is the focus. That is the whole reason for being there. So any issues that you may have with their teacher, with the principal, etc., you need to know what they are before you go in there, and you need to not let them get in the way. All right. So that is incredibly important, because most IEP meetings that are ineffective or unsuccessful always end, or at least most of them, end up devolving into people with personality conflicts fighting with each other, and the kid is lost. A good idea to remain focused, and this is just the easiest as far as how to do it. It is by far and away the most difficult to actually carry out. Have your kid attend the meeting. Have your child attend the meeting. It's hard to not focus on the child when the child is sitting right there next to you. Now, that is incredibly difficult. If you can't do that, then it's up to you. Carry a picture with you of them. All right. Write down their name, Sharpie on a big index card, and set it right in front of you. Or better yet, and I have actually suggested this to a parent, bring a large photo of your child or your family and set it in the middle of the meeting. Now, it's a little shocking and it's kind of weird, because most people aren't going to do that. But what it does is it focuses everybody's attention on the fact that they are talking about a person who needs their help, an actual person. Okay. So you're going to hear these things under the remain focused line. These are common. These are the things that I hear a lot. Oh, we have dozens of kids that have autism, so we know what we're doing. Well, you all know what that means. It basically means that they believe that your child who has a label is no different than any other child who has that same label. That is both insulting and incredibly incorrect. But you're going to hear it, and you probably already have. But as it shows next, if you've met one person with a disability, you've met exactly one person with that disability. And that goes for all individuals with disabilities, all of them. Okay. Appropriateness. You're going to hear that word a lot. Appropriateness essentially means legally what your child needs. Okay. So when you hear the word appropriate, that needs to trigger in your head what your child needs. What your child needs, what your child needs. And I know saying it repeatedly is kind of annoying, but really I can't emphasize it enough. It's the most important thing. Okay, so focus on your child. Absolutely. Number one, and do not let the district get off that path. Do not let them do that. Always recenter, refocus back to the child. Number three, trust your instincts. Guys, this is the hardest thing for people to do, because you, well, rightfully so, don't know anything about how to teach your kid. At least you think so. The reality is that you are by far and away more knowledgeable. You are the expert on your child. All right. The teachers, the therapists, the school psychologists, your doctors, everybody that you know of a professional class that interacts with your child knows nothing compared to what you know. All right. You have been around him or her every moment of their life. You have seen what they have seen. You have felt what they have felt. Trust that. Okay. If it sounds good to you, then it probably is. If it doesn't sound good to you, no matter what the explanation that might be offered, you have to trust your gut. Do not let people convince you that your gut is wrong. Okay? So just understand, if you've got a bad feeling about something, it's bad, and you need to accept that. Okay, further down, we're going to address how to, and I've put up while I have the opportunity for you to obtain essentially an example of this process. You need to identify your child's strengths, their needs. You need to make a list, and it needs to be constant, and it needs to be updated, and it needs to be corrected. It needs to be essentially your child on a piece of paper. what can they do well in anything? Even if it's, well, he's got the loudest belch that I've ever heard. Okay, sounds stupid, but that might actually be something that can be used in the process of educating your child. Anything that you find to be impressive about them, that you find to be extraordinary, or even just a little bit odd but cute. Also, their needs. Guys, you know their needs because you live them every day. You know what they need to have from you, and you know what they don't need to have from you. They need the same things in school, the exact same things. So making sure that that IEP reflects those needs is going to be, unfortunately, your responsibility, because the school will never know your child the way you do, not even close. So relying on them to identify what needs exist, what strengths exist, is relying on somebody essentially who has no understanding of something coming in and telling you how it is. You wouldn't do that with your own health. Say you had a doctor who'd never seen you before and they come in and say, well, here's what's wrong with you. You're not going to do that. So don't do it with your child. Don't assume because they are teachers that they know your kid. And it's not that they are lazy or that they don't care. It's just the fact of time and experience. They haven't had the time around your child and they haven't had the experience. And I know Carrie can speak to that more than anything else. And she is very quick at her school to, let the parents of those children know you're the expert, all right, on your kid. And if this is something you think that they need, then we're definitely going to look into it, provide it, make sure that they can get it, because you know your child better than we do. And the hope is that someday the teachers, the administrators will know your child much better than they do when you're meeting with them. But they'll never know them the way you do. So please accept that, trust that. Don't let anybody tell you different. Okay, this is number 4. This is a tough one. Competence. Basically, do you know what you're doing? You need to treat teachers no different than I know you treat every doctor or lawyer that you interact with. Yeah, they have a general understanding of the law or medicine, but they don't know you, and they don't know your situation. Think about it. When you go to see a doctor, the first thing you do is you start rattling off all the things that have ever occurred to you in your life from a medical perspective, all the medications you've taken, injuries that you've had, illnesses, family history, etc. They need to get to know you. Okay? They cannot in any way address your situations, address your illnesses, address your legal concerns if they don't know your story. Now, they don't need as much information. They don't get as much information as teachers do, and they don't require as much information as teachers do. Teachers require constant information because essentially, in order to do their job effectively, to the point where your child is getting the appropriate education they need, they have to know your kid almost as well as you do. And again, I think that's something Carrie can speak to, is that, even the teachers with the best intentions and the greatest training and the biggest heart, if they don't know your kid very well, they're gonna be limited in what it is that they can do. So they may have a general knowledge of tactics, curriculum, etc., but they do not know your kid. So when they throw things around like, well, this is an autism classroom, or this is a program that we normally do for our autistic students, see how it kind of blends with the hope, keep it focused on your child. Don't assume that when they say we have this autistic classroom, that they have done a deep dive into your students' needs, your particular students' needs, and found that to be the most appropriate placement for your child. They are doing a very general assessment of, these are the general characteristics of autism. These are the things that we are going to have to plan for. And these are the, these are the support. Well, that may be sufficient for some, but it is rarely sufficient for all. Second, If it seems like they don't know what they're doing, it's because they don't. And that's okay. All right. Having a master's degree in education does not mean you know everything. And it doesn't mean you know what to do in every situation for every student. To expect that or to assume that is, well, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. So if it sounds like they don't know what they're doing, you're right. I mean, I don't know what else to put it. You are right. They probably don't. They are not trained to teach your child. They are trained to teach a child. And you have to fill in the blanks. I like to use, and I've actually used this in hearings before, I like to use the example of Jurassic Park. Most of you are familiar with it, where they're going through the little tour and they're explaining, well, how the heck did you create these dinosaurs? And they said, well, we got this mosquito, we got blood, and then we found that the DNA in the blood had gaps. So what did we do? Well, we filled in the gaps. That is all you're trying to do with your teachers, with your administrators, is you are trying to help them fill in those gaps, to give it that individualization that is required under the law. Help them fill in those gaps. Find out what it is that they generally do for a person with the diagnosis that your child has, and then treat that as a starting point. Not as this is what we're going to do. Treat that as a starting point. Fill in those gaps. Find out how to tweak things. And we're going to let you know how to fill in those gaps here in a second. Okay, moving down, dealing with conflict, number 5. Gosh, don't we all deal with conflict? I feel like that preaching to the choir does not justify what I'm doing here. Most of you are here because you have tremendous issues with the school district, and it is a very confrontational relationship. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of disagreement. So how do you deal effectively with conflict? Well, most of us are not effective at dealing with conflict. Most of us would rather avoid conflict. Most of us don't want to see somebody else, well, upset with them or angry with them. And especially if that person is around your child when you aren't 6.5 hours a day, 5 days a week. That can be, well, it can drive you crazy. So what you have to do to effectively deal with conflict is you have to recognize what the conflict is. There are 3 main reasons for conflict that I've identified in my years as as both a school teacher, a district administrator, and as an attorney. Number 1, which is the primary source of conflict, is power struggles. And most of the time you are going to get those power struggles when you engage with district administrators, school administrators. Most principals believe that the school that they work in is their school. It is their school. They run it. They say what goes. They say what doesn't go. Most administrators, some teachers are not very open to the idea of having parents offer suggestions because they view it as a parent telling them what to do. And it's childish and it's wrong, but it happens. When they resist, it is strictly a desire to essentially say, you can't make me do it, or you can't tell me what to do. So you have to accept that. Going into your negotiations, if you want to minimize the power struggle that can occur when you have a person who wants to assert their authority, is sometimes you just have to accept that they have that authority. They just do. There is nobody in that moment that you're going to be able to turn to and say, well, he's being a jerk. Well, it's not going to matter. So recognizing the power conflict when it arises, if that is the case, you need to walk away. Don't give up, but just walk away. Because people that essentially try to assert their authority aren't going to receive whatever it is they're looking for when they assert their authority if you just simply exercise your freedom to get up and walk away and say, when you're ready to talk and when you're ready to work as a team, we'll come back together and do this. Okay? At that point, what you have done is you have not denigrated the person. You have not ignored or refuted their dominance. They still have it. Okay? They're in control. They have the power. But what you have done is you have established your own power, that you don't have to sit there. You don't have to accept that. And you can also call it for what it is. You're being childish, but you don't have to be insulting about it. Just simply get up and say, things are getting a little heated. Obviously, this is not going to be productive. I am very willing to come back at a time where we can do some more or have some more productive discussion, but it cannot be had right now. So I think we need to reschedule our meeting. It's okay. It's okay to do that. It not only is it okay, but it's essential. Don't feel like, even if you're in a stressful situation yourself, even if it's my son has been suspended from the bus and I have to get him up and take him to school every day, don't feel like it has to be muscled through, that you have to just try to get it solved immediately. Because remember, the goal is getting it solved. And you don't have the power or the authority to be able to bulldoze the school district into doing what you want them to do when they're opposed to it. It's just not going to happen. You're just essentially creating a scenario where you'll have to take it to the next step. And the next step is, well, calling me. Now that might be effective, but it's also going to be costly. So you want to make sure that you accept that, and that when you see it happening, that you just walk away and try it again at another time. Because ultimately, they're adults. Okay, it's hard to believe, I know, but they are adults. And it is reasonably likely that when you do that, you could cause them to reflect upon their behavior. And I've seen it happen. So it's worth a shot. Why not? B, in dealing with context, school apathy. Hey, don't worry about it. We got it. We deal with kids like this all the time. Don't worry about it. Everything's cool. That's bad, because you know your kid and you know how difficult and challenging your kid is, because he's been or she's been difficult and challenging your entire life, or sorry, their entire life. You've experienced it every day. So you know what you're looking for is you're looking for them to acknowledge the seriousness, the intensity, the effort that is going to be required to do what they're legally required to do. And so in order to address school apathy, what you have to do is you have to create, again, you have to make it personal. You have to create a personal attachment or an emotional attachment to your child. So what you do in that case is you just simply draw the line from where they're at with what the school is doing to the eventual outcome. Let me give you a specific example. A case that I was involved in, that I was representing a client in Missouri in a situation where the student was not a behavior problem, which is rare for parents to hire me when their child is not a behavior problem, but just wasn't getting anything out of being in school. They were in a general education, or most of the time in a general education classroom, and they were in fourth grade and had a barely kindergarten reading level. Well, what happened is that the school basically said, well, that's the best we can do. That is the best we can do. Kindergarten, fourth grade reading level, what we're doing is appropriate because he made progress. See, he was at a pre-kindergarten level 2 years ago, And now he's at a kindergarten level. So he's making progress. This was by far and away the most effective argument, and it had nothing to do with the facts. It had nothing to do with the facts. And this worked for a hearing officer, which is not bad. Is that I just simply asked the individual who was saying, this is the best we can do. I said, so essentially what you're saying, and this is the logical fallacy tactic, essentially what you're saying is by the time he is ready to graduate from high school, if we use your assessment of how things are progressing, he will walk across the stage with a 4th grade reading level. And he has an above average IQ, which he did. And that was my argument. That's not a legal argument. That's not a factual argument. It is just simply putting out there the conclusion of the school district's, the logical conclusion of the school district's efforts. And when you put it into terms like that, it seems really bad. I mean, think about that. A kid with which they agreed, the kid had an average IQ, above average. It just, there's no defense for that. How does a kid like that at 18 years old walk out of school and can only read on a 4th grade level? And you think that that's appropriate. You think that that is acceptable. And it won. So use that tactic when the school just doesn't seem to be taking your child's limitations and needs seriously. If you keep doing what you're doing, this is what I am getting when he's done. This is what he's going to walk out into the world with or without. So try that. Last one is C, school impotence. So what do you want us to do? How many of you have heard that? I've heard that as a parent. I mean, fortunately for us, we actually, in some cases, know what to do. Most of you don't. So when they go in and say, what do you want us to do? Well, your answer needs to be, well, your job, which is to educate my son or my daughter. So how do you go about addressing that? Well, first, unfortunately, most of you realize at this point that you've had to become experts in whatever disabling condition happens to impair your child. You have essentially either become experts or you're seeking information to become experts. Well, unfortunately, you kind of have to do a little bit of that with your child's education. You have to know or be familiar with curriculum, methodology, tactics, assessments, evaluations, reporting, the law, and that stinks. You have a job or you have other stuff going on or you have stuff you have to do and learn about. That's just one more thing. So what you want to do when you hear this, so what do you want us to do? Don't get all geeked up and think, oh, I can just throw anything out. Because remember, they can always say no, and they will. So what do? Get out there and have a plan of how you're going to address those issues that the school is saying they have. If it's a behavior issue, then start with, well, how can a person deal with the behavior that my child is exhibiting in their school? Ask questions like, why are they behaving that way? What's causing that behavior? Okay. Ask questions. Use that opportunity to essentially promote or prompt them to actually think. Because by that point, if they're using the words, so what do you want us to do? They're shocked into, they're not even thinking. They're at a loss. They are literally at a loss. So what you have to do is restart their brains, get them working by asking questions. Do your research. Have an idea as to not everything, but where to start. Well, what are some tactics for dealing with this behavior? What are some tactics for having this out? And then last, suggest help. Have an idea as to who might know. Your psychiatrist, your psychologist, your primary care physician, doctors at hospitals, educational experts you've worked with before, anything. Just have an idea as to who you can suggest could help. In Arkansas and in Missouri, I believe this is the case in most states, there's federal money that goes to an organization that is to provide advocacy for parents. Those are good sources. Okay, they're called parental something. I'm not exactly sure, but it's a funding mechanism of IDEA. They're required. They have to be in every state. Also, the Department of Education has an entire unit of people whose job is to monitor the compliance with IDEA. Contact them. Okay, they are your state's experts, and they may not know any more than the teachers you're talking to, but they have the authority to tell the teachers you're talking to what to do. So use them. In Arkansas and actually in Missouri as well, there are organizations that provide supports to teachers, school districts, etc., to assist with children that are difficult or that are needing things that aren't readily available to the school district, such as assistive technology like FM systems, hearing aids, things like that. There are organizations in your state, most probably, that are there to assist school districts in educating your child. So know who they are and how to contact them. All right, moving on to number 6. Let me get my piece of paper here real quick. Okay, this is by far and away the most difficult. And the reason why it's difficult is because it seems wrong. Why do I have to negotiate with a school district to get what is legally required to be provided? Why? I should just say, do what you're required by law to do. Well, when you do that, all you are inviting is what I'm going to go through at the very bottom of this checklist. That's all you're doing. You're inviting that scenario, which is where you're going to have to contact me. If you have that kind of money and you have that kind of time, then by all means, give me a call and I will do whatever I need to do to make sure that we get what he or she needs. If you would like to not spend the money to be able to hire an attorney, or if you don't have that as a probability, then you need to learn to negotiate. You need to understand that you can't make them. You can't make them. And there is, and I tell this to clients all the time, there's no police officer or law enforcement official that you're going to be able to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, the school district's breaking the law. And they'll come in and they'll slap them on the hands and say, no, you have to do this, or we're going to shut you down, or something along those lines. That doesn't exist. All right. The State Department in every state is going to be very limited in what they are legally allowed to do. And that's not anything that we have to get into here. Just trust me. It's very limited in what the State Department of Education can do. So learn to negotiate. Number 1, know yourself. Okay. You have to know what it is you're bringing into, and this goes back to assessing your own biases. Okay. Assess your state of mind. Are you ready to negotiate? Right. And the most important thing about determining as to whether you're ready to negotiate it or not is, do you have to maintain the relationship? Here is something that I always, or at least frequently, tell my clients and school districts. You guys are going to have to be together for another 8 years. In the case of of an individual student that I represented about 3 years ago, he had just started kindergarten, and already they were at each other's throats, the school district and the parents. And that was something that was concerning because they're not going to move. The parents can't. They're going to be in the school district for another 12 years. So if you both understand that you're going to have to be around each other and work with each other, whether you like it or not, for a long period of time, that is going to substantially affect how you approach negotiating with the school district. Because you'll understand that ultimately a relationship that is essentially destroyed is not going to be in the best interest of your child. It just won't. So try to maintain the relationship. Remember, like every relationship, you can yell and scream at each other and you can call each other names and you can get angry. But you have to understand that ultimately there has to be some repair. There has to be some renewal of that relationship. Second, be honest with yourself. Okay. Don't jump immediately to the worst case scenario and don't reflect or focus on the worst possible outcome. It's never as good as it seems. It's never as bad as it seems. So try to center yourself in that. And then, of course, address your real issues, If your real issue is with your child and the education they're receiving, then you are going to be able to negotiate effectively. If your real issue is that the paraprofessional really ticked you off, then that may not be something that you want to bring to the attention of the IEP team and in an effort to try to address the services that your child is receiving. Try to focus on your child and try to identify if you're being motivated by things other than what your child needs. Be honest, it's okay. We're all going to get to the point where someday some teacher, some administrator is going to upset us, is going to make us angry for something that has nothing to do with our child's education or services. So just be ready for it. If it hasn't happened already, it will. Okay, number 3, BATNAs and WATNAs. They are weird, but they're acronyms and they're listed below. The best alternative to no agreement. Know what that is. If you walk into a meeting, you need to know what is the bare bones minimum that you have to have before you walk out and say, we're not getting anywhere. Okay? What is the best alternative to no agreement? And that just means that if we don't get an agreement, what's the best that could happen out of that? And then what's the worst that could happen out of that? If we don't get an agreement, what's the worst thing that could happen? And that is going to help you gauge when to make an agreement and when to not, when to pursue reconciliation and when to not. You should always pursue agreements. You should always pursue reconciliation, but not when the best alternative to no agreement is something that is possible. If that's possible, then you don't need to negotiate. If the worst alternative to no agreement is bad, then you are definitely motivated to negotiate. And all that means, and I'll give you an example. You have a child, let's just go back to the removed from the bus. You have a child who's been removed from the bus because of behavior, and you're going in to talk to the school about it. Okay, this is a negotiation. Let's just treat it as such. What is the best alternative to having no agreement? Well, if you have no agreement, the best thing that can happen is he doesn't get to ride the bus anymore. And what's the worst alternative? Well, you have to take your kid to school every day. Even if the school district is paying for it, you have to take your kid to school every day, or a complete stranger in a vehicle that may or may not be functioning all the time has to take your child to school as well. Well, that's bad. And the best is he doesn't get to ride the bus. So what are the incentives to negotiate for you as a parent? Probably pretty good, depending on what your work situation, transportation situation is like. So that's just, again, a brief overview of that. You'll get better at it just simply asking those questions. What's the worst thing that could happen if I don't get any type of agreement? And what's the best thing that could happen if I don't get any type of agreement? Okay, moving down to the B. Is the school willing to negotiate? Guess what, guys? You both have to be willing to negotiate in order to hopefully arrive at a conclusion. If you are getting only no from a school district, if you're throwing out options and all they're saying is no and not offering any counter option and not providing any alternatives, then they are not negotiating. They are essentially telling you, until you get to what we want, we're just going to say no. That's not negotiating. Don't fall for it and don't continue to engage with it. Just walk away. You can always schedule a new meeting. Here are clues to what to look for when you're wondering if the school is willing to negotiate or not. Are they making an effort to communicate? Guys, if they're not talking to you, if they're not throwing, and you know the difference, you know when somebody's just there listening to what you have to say because they feel they have to, and as soon as it's over, they're going to walk out and forget you even exist. You know that feeling. You know how they act. And you also know how a person acts when they're genuinely interested in trying to solve a problem. So are they making an effort to communicate with you? If you're the only one doing the communication, no negotiation is going to happen. It's not going to happen. So don't even bother continuing. It's not that it won't happen eventually. It's not going to happen at that meeting. The school has to acknowledge that there's a problem. If you think there's a problem, but the school doesn't think there's a problem, that's a problem. And what you have to do is you have to communicate with the school district in a way that is going to convince them that there is, in fact, a problem. If it's your problem, then you have to make it the school's problem as well. If it's your child's problem, you have to make it the school's problem. If it's the school's problem, it automatically becomes your problem. And that's not fair. It's not appropriate, but it's the way it is. If the school has a problem with your child and you don't think it's a big deal, you have a problem that you have to address. But if you think there's a problem and they don't, then unless you convince them that it's a problem, they're not going to have to or want to address anything. Okay. When you hear, what do you want us to do? Don't get happy. That's not a good statement. You don't want that kind of freedom. You do not. Because all they're doing is saying, well, just tell us what you want. Well, you're not a professional educator and you don't know exactly what is going to impact that student in a positive way. So if you throw it out there because you've heard about it or read about it or some other parent told you about it, then it's probably going to work, probably not going to work. You just don't know. Not to mention, but all you're doing is getting them or letting them off the hook. Remember, they're the experts. They're getting paid to do this. They need to do their jobs. So encourage them to do their jobs. Don't let them off the hook by saying, okay, all you have to do is this and I'll never give you any problems. Well, you don't know, number one, if that's going to suffice for the year, let alone the next 10 years they're in school. And you don't know if things are going to change. They need to be involved. They need to be as involved, if possible, as you are. And if they're not, then getting to an appropriate education is going to be very difficult, if not impossible. Okay, negotiation, what to do when to start. When you start negotiating, set the bar really high. If what you want is 90 minutes of speech services a week, what they're getting is 30, ask for 120. Okay? The reason why you do that is because you establish then a ceiling. And in most cases, what will happen in negotiation is the two parties will have two opposite ideas and that they will meet somewhere in the middle. So what you want to do is you want to make sure the middle where you meet is as close to what you want as humanly possible. Okay? So you have to go back and forth, but you want to establish that bar high. Be the first one to offer. Don't be the one to accept the first offer or to receive the first offer. Because if the school district throws something out at you first, then they've set the bar. Don't let them do that. Don't go too far, too fast. All right. That means Don't sit there if you're negotiating compensatory educational services because they didn't receive speech for as long as they were supposed to. Well, don't sit there and say, well, I want 175 hours of compensatory educational services and speech. Oh, that's ridiculous. Okay, think about that. It's 175 hours. I mean, you are literally talking about almost 20 days of speech services, 8 hours a day. So be realistic. You want it to be high, but you want it to be in the realm of possible. And then finally, when negotiating, always ask questions. When you are hit with opposition, ask questions. Don't argue. Don't make statements of fact. Don't make claims. Ask questions. And there are a list of them below. Why is your not what I asked for? How is this going to address the problem? Make them justify. They have to be able to justify what they do to a court. And so therefore, you need to get that justification from them so you know why they're doing, or at least why they think they're doing what they're doing. Number 7, the most important rule. And this is where you get to when to call an attorney, when to file a state administrative complaint. If you hear the words from your school district, we can't, basically what they're telling you is they're telling you the law doesn't let us do this. That's what they're telling you. Guys, IDEA and Section 504 does one thing. It establishes a floor, not a ceiling, a floor. Districts cannot go below this floor. Anything above that floor level is something the district is legally allowed to, and in some cases required to do. The words "we can't" can never be used as justification for denial of services. Yes, they can. Now, the only question is not can they, should they? That's the question you need to be asking. And that implicates the law. So if you hear "we can't," basically they're saying the law doesn't let us. If they're saying the law doesn't let them, the only thing that's going to counter that is having a hearing officer or a judge tell them, yeah, the law does let you. You're not going to be able to convince them of that. And they're going to have an attorney there who's going to tell them that, because most attorneys that represent school districts are just as, well, uninformed about the law and the case history as the districts are, because they don't practice that stuff. This is all I do. So at that point, that's when you really need to consult an attorney, or you need to file a state administrative complaint. Now, the good thing is that I have samples. Plus, if you go to your State Department of Education website, they're going to have samples of state administrative complaints, due process hearing complaints. You're going to be able to see those things. So that is, and this is shared. I know Kathleen, I emailed it to her so that she will be able to provide it to all of you. It is the most exhaustive checklist that I and Carrie could come up with, from the perspectives of a parent, a school teacher, a district administrator, and an attorney. These are the things that are going to give you the greatest capacity to affect change in your school district. And you're always going to be honing these skills, because guys, if you're like us, IEP meetings are no different than annual checkups at the physician, or, you know, going to a 4th of July barbecue. It's just what you do every year. It's like Christmas, only bad for some of you. I mean, hopefully for others, it's very good. For me, is if I'm there in my professional capacity, it's always bad. So that's how you do it. So print this off, get this email to you, and follow it. It really does work. It's not going to work for every situation, but it's going to get you through a lot of situations that you may not have gotten through had you not followed these rules. So I appreciate you guys all coming here, and good luck. It's really, really difficult out there, but you guys are going to do what you have to do for your kids. I trust and believe that, and great things are going to come of it. I just want to hopefully give you the tools that are going to allow you to take that energy and that passion and consolidate it in the most effective effort you can put forward.